a little on the on metrics and the metrics layer and the semantic layer. I'm going to be using those two terms sort of interchangeably. This has already come up a bunch today, and the metrics layer and semantics have been in the news. There was the Looker Tableau announcement, and I feel like a lot of people have been saying, what even is the metrics layer? So yeah, I guess this is less of a deep dive and more of like skirt the surface, simple introduction to what's going on with metrics. So I'm going to try and run to time as well, because I know we're a bit behind. I even have a timer going. So a quick reminder, like why data analysts exist. Why do we get up in the morning? Why do we get the megabucks? The reason is that our companies are kind of getting flooded with this raw data. And this already came up a bunch. Like Chad mentioned, that Convoy, the Postgres database, is like not a good representation of the real world. And so what happens is we have to kind of do analytics to make the raw data useful to the rest of the company. We need the data to be transformed and to be aggregated to ask the kind of questions that people are interested in. So these are usually like, what's the revenue look like? What do orders look like for this quarter? Or how many daily active users do we have? And those aren't looking at individual records, so like a given payment. That's usually aggregations over a whole bunch of data. So we do this analytics and there's kind of a presentation layer as well. And that's what it's all about. And once we have that, we have our charts, we can see our profits going up and everyone's happy. So the overall kind of message here is that like when we aggregate value together and when we do analytics, we add value to the data and also to the business. So you want to kind of spread data throughout the organization, but like how do you go about doing that? And I find there's kind of like 3 ways to do it, or like 3 ways that I've seen. So the first thing you could do is you could just give the raw data to the end users. So you just completely like dump them with everything in the data warehouse. And like this works in a really limited environment where you have a small technical team. And that technical, I'm seeing like a lot of messages and I'm wondering, is the mic, okay, no, fine. I was wondering if my mic was down or something. If you have a really small team and everyone's technical and there isn't that much data, then actually this works kind of well. Like everyone can write their own SQL and they can query the raw data. But in general, there's a lot of people in the company where it's not part of their job to understand what an inner join is versus a left join and all that kind of stuff. So what companies tend to migrate towards is, well, what if we have a data team that can provide complete answers to the end users? So this tends to be the most common structure, which is that everyone around the company comes to someone with questions. And I think like Maura was talking a lot about this, which is like we can have pre-configured dashboards for people to look at. And like we kind of, if they need a change to that dashboard, then that dashboard has to get recreated by an analyst. And usually the kind of upper echelons of management see this as working just like this lorry, that it just drives in, the data team's going to dump a perfectly packaged analysis each time somebody needs it. But if you've been an analyst for 5 minutes, you know that it's way more like this. You're fielding questions from multiple different people constantly. I like this idea that like sharing context dies when it's just done in DMs, and loads of that happens. So you're answering the same question over and over again in DMs, and it's just not scalable. But this is really common. So a lot of data teams feel under stress. A lot of analysts at the moment, they're not super happy because they kind of want to be doing something a bit more in depth, but you're kind of fielding the same questions over and over again. So what if there was a third way, right? Like what if we could give, and this is where I'm talking a bit about self-serve, like what if we could give the data consumers around the business the kind of some meaningful building blocks, and they could take those blocks and piece them together to answer the data questions that they have without having to speak to the data team, but without having to start from scratch, right? Wouldn't that be perfect? And when we talk about the metrics layer, this is kind of what we're talking about. So the one thing to take away here is that a metrics or a semantic layer, what it does is that it gives data consumers around the business some understandable and meaningful building blocks that they can take, piece together in their own way, and use that to answer their own questions. So there's kind of a technical component to that and also a sort of user experience too. So what could we imagine these perfect building blocks would be like? So I think these words have already cropped up like throughout the other presentations. But in general, people want to query meaningful entities. So they don't care about like individual tables. They just want to know about emails or orders, transactions, users. So they should be things that mean things to people throughout the business. And then from those entities, you probably want to choose a bunch of relevant metrics. So if it's orders, it's like show me total orders. Maybe I want to split that by geography or filter the data to my relevant business area. But this is just the right amount of flexibility I found for consumers around the business. But like what we don't want to force people to do is joining tables together, having to play with raw data and JSON columns, and definitely not grouping data together, right? So no raw SQL, but querying these would be perfect. And so the metrics layer and the semantics layer, these are generally the keywords that we use to describe those building blocks. So you have metrics, sometimes called measures, dimensions, and filters. And so metrics are basically calculations over entities. So for orders, total revenue. Dimensions would be attributes about those entities, maybe the address where the order was sent or the time at which it was taken. And then filters are attributes we can use to kind of segment the data down to relevant subsets. So let's look at a really quick example. Like, here's a common question that might come into the business, to the data team. What is the total order count split by status? So I want to see all of the delivered orders, all the pending orders, the returned orders. And so here, total order count is the metric, and status is a dimension. And I guess the entity here would be orders, right? So you take all of the orders, split them by their status, and then just count the number of them in there. And then equivalently, you might imagine that people around the business might want to filter that differently. So I want to see just for customers in Brazil who have placed orders in the last month, for example. And you can imagine this question alone has so many different permutations that people would be interested in around the business. And obviously the way that you get a good feel for data within the company is to kind of fiddle with it and play with it. So with metrics and semantics, what you get to do is just tweak the things that are meaningful for you. So tweak the filters, tweak the metric and the dimension, and not worry about the raw underlying data or the SQL that powers it. So the metrics layer, there's one thing to take away. The metrics layer and semantics layer maps meaningful words throughout our organization to code that the data analyst can understand. And so the data analysts maintain code, which they love because it's version controlled. It makes sense. It's, it has one definition. And then for the rest of the business and the data consumers, they get to consume metrics that make sense to them, like total order count, status, or customers in Brazil. And everyone's living the dream. So that's how it worked. So now you're probably thinking, where can I get myself a semantics layer? So a quick plug, like when I'm not talking about metrics layers, I'm building one with the team at Lightdash. So Lightdash is a BI tool that's completely metrics layer native. So we have our own, and we integrate deeply with DBT. So you write your metrics in DBT, and we surface up a user experience for people around your business to query common metrics. And since you're here, you can skip the queue for Lightdash Cloud, which is in beta at the moment. So you can join it for free. And all we ask is for some of your feedback. So yeah, hit lightdash.com/DQM. And you can also join us on some of the socials as well. That's it from me.